There is something deeply calming about the ocean. Even the thought of it, the wide, dark expanse of water stretching beyond any horizon, has a way of slowing the mind down. The sound of waves arriving on a shore, one after another, in a rhythm that has never once stopped. The feeling of being small next to something vast. The sense that the world is continuing, quietly, without needing anything from you. Tonight, that is what we are going to explore together. We are going to spend some time learning about the ocean, not in a hurried way, not with urgency or alarm. We are simply going to move through it, fact by fact, depth by depth, layer by layer, the way water itself moves, slowly, continuously, without force. You do not need to follow along closely. You do not need to remember any of this. The information will arrive gently, stay a moment, and then drift away like a current. If you find yourself drifting too, into sleep, into half-awareness, into that quiet in-between place, that is perfectly fine. That is, in fact, exactly what this is for. The ocean has been here for a very long time, and there's a great deal to say about it. Before we begin, there is one thing worth sitting with for a moment, a single fact that tends to reframe everything else. The ocean, the global ocean, the connected body of seawater that covers most of this planet, is home to somewhere around 80% of all life on Earth. 80%, not just ocean life, not just marine species. 80% of all life. Every creature, every organism, every living thing that exists on this planet. The vast majority of it lives not on the land, not in the sky, but in the water, in the ocean. When you think about elephants and forests and birds and grasslands and human cities, all of that together represents just a fraction of the living world. The ocean holds the rest. Most of life on Earth has never seen sunlight. Most of life has never touched land. Most of life on this planet exists in cold, dark, pressurized water, drifting or swimming or anchored to a surface far below any wave. That is where we are going tonight. Not into the frightening parts, not into the dramatic. We are simply going to look calmly and openly at this place where most of life on Earth exists, at the history of it, at the geography, at the creatures that live in it, at the systems that keep it moving. There's a great deal of calm to be found in all of this. So let yourself settle in, let your body relax, and let the ocean come to you. The ocean is a single, continuous body of salt water. That is perhaps the most important thing to understand at the start. When we say the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, we're using names for regions, but they are not truly separate. They are all connected. The water moves between them. A molecule of water near Japan might, over centuries, finds way to the coast of Brazil. The ocean is one thing, not many things. It covers approximately 361 million square kilometers of Earth's surface. To put that into perspective, if you took all the land on Earth, every continent, every island, every patch of ground, it would fill just under 30% of the planet's surface. The ocean takes up the rest. More than 70% of Earth is covered in water. The ocean is not just wide, it is also extraordinarily deep. The average depth of the ocean is around 3,700 meters. That is more than 3.5 kilometers of water, straight down on average. The deepest point ever measured is in the Western Pacific, in a place called the Challenger Deep, located within the Mariana Trench. It reaches nearly 11,000 meters below the surface, 11 kilometers down. If you place Mount Everest at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, its peak would still be more than 2 kilometers beneath the waves. The total volume of ocean water is estimated at approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers. It is a number that has very little meaning to a human mind. It is simply too large to picture, but it gives some sense of the scale of what we are talking about. The ocean is not just a feature of the planet. In many ways, the ocean is the planet. The ocean is ancient. Not ancient the way that mountains or rivers are ancient. The ocean predates almost everything we might point to on land. It formed during the early history of the planet itself, billions of years ago, when Earth was still a very different place. The leading scientific understanding is that the oceans formed through a combination of processes. As the young Earth cooled after its formation roughly 4.5 billion years ago, water vapor that had been trapped in rocks and minerals was released through volcanic activity. This outgassing, water vapor, and other gases rising from the interior of the planet eventually condensed into liquid water as temperatures dropped. There is also strong evidence that comets and asteroids, which carry water ice, contribute to Earth's water supply during a period of heavy bombardment in the early solar system. Exactly how much of Earth's water came from these sources versus from the planet itself is still a subject of ongoing study. The earliest oceans formed around 4 billion years ago. They were not the same as today's oceans. The composition of the water was different, the chemistry was different, the temperature was different, but the basic reality was already there, a world mostly covered in water. It was in this ancient ocean that life is believed to have first appeared. Simple, single-celled organisms, perhaps 3.5 billion years ago or more. No plants, no animals, just chemistry, slowly becoming biology. Everything that has lived on this planet since, including every human being who has ever existed, descends from those early ocean dwellers. Life began in the water, and the ocean has never stopped being the center of life on Earth. Although the ocean is one continuous body of water, it is conventionally divided into 5 named regions. The largest is the Pacific Ocean. It covers more area than all of Earth's land masses combined. It stretches from the Arctic in the north to the Antarctic in the south, and from the western coast of the Americas to the eastern coast of Asia and Australia. It is not just the largest ocean, it is the largest single geographic feature on the planet's surface. The Pacific contains thousands of islands, volcanic islands, coral atolls, ancient island chains formed by tectonic hotspots moving slowly across the seafloor. The deepest parts of the ocean are largely found in the Pacific, along a series of trenches that run through the western portion of the basin. The Atlantic Ocean is the second largest. It separates the Americas from Europe and Africa. The Atlantic is younger than the Pacific in geological terms. It began to form when the supercontinent Pangaea started to break apart roughly 200 million years ago, and it has been slowly widening ever since. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a long underwater mountain range running down the center of the ocean, is where new seafloor is continuously being formed as tectonic plates pull apart. The Indian Ocean lies to the south of Asia, between Africa and Australia. It is the warmest of the major ocean regions, largely because of its geography. It is partially enclosed by land, and the land masses around it accumulate heat in ways that influence water temperatures. The Indian Ocean is also strongly shaped by the monsoon systems of Asia, which shift its surface currents seasonally. The Southern Ocean, also called the Antarctic Ocean, surrounds Antarctica. It was formally recognized as a distinct ocean by the International Hydrographic Organization in 2000, though its recognition has been somewhat inconsistent across different institutions over the years. It is characterized by some of the strongest winds and roughest seas on the planet, driven by powerful circumpolar currents that move continuously around the continent. The Arctic Ocean is the smallest and shallowest of 5. It sits at the top of the world, centered over the North Pole, and is largely covered by sea ice for much of the year. Despite its small size, it plays an important role in global climate systems, and the changes occurring in the Arctic Ocean are among the most closely monitored developments in Earth science. Together, these 5 regions, though they flow into one another without any walls or barriers, cover the majority of the planet. The ocean is not a uniform body of water from surface to floor. It is organized into distinct layers, each with its own character, its own temperature, its own light, its own community of life. The uppermost layer is called the sunlit zone, or the epipelagic zone. It extends from the surface down to about 200 meters. This is where sunlight penetrates well enough to support photosynthesis, the process by which tiny plant-like organisms convert sunlight into energy. The sunlit zone is home to most of the ocean life that humans are familiar with. Fish near the surface, sea turtles, dolphins, whales that rise to breathe, and the great floating communities of plankton that form the base of almost everything else. Below 200 meters, light begins to fade. From 200 to 1,000 meters lies the twilight zone, or the mesopelagic zone. Some filtered sunlight reaches here, enough to create a dim, blue-green glow during the day, but not enough for photosynthesis. Animals in this zone often spend the day here in the relative darkness and rise toward the surface at night to feed. Many species here have developed bioluminescence, the ability to produce their own light, a soft, cold glow used for communication, camouflage, or attracting prey. Below 1,000 meters, there is no sunlight at all. This is the midnight zone, or the bathypelagic zone, extending down to about 4,000 meters. The water here is uniformly cold, just a few degrees above freezing, and the pressure is enormous. Animals that live here exist in a world of complete darkness and crushing weight, and they have adapted to those conditions in remarkable ways. Below the midnight zone, from 4,000 to 6,000 meters, lies the abyssal zone. This region covers a vast area of the deep ocean floor, the flat, sediment-covered plains that make up much of the seafloor. It is one of the least explored environments on Earth. Fewer humans have visited the abyssal zone than have traveled to space. And then there's the tidal zone, the deepest layer of all, found in the ocean's trenches, named after Hades, the Greek underworld. The tidal zone begins at about 6,000 meters and extends to the very deepest points, like the Challenger Deep. The pressures here are more than 1,000 times greater than at the surface. Each of these layers is a world unto itself. The ocean is salty. This is a fact so basic that it can seem unremarkable. But the saltiness of seawater is actually a profound and complex characteristic that shapes almost everything about how the ocean works. On average, every kilogram of seawater contains about 35 grams of dissolved salt. This is sometimes expressed as a salinity of 35 parts per thousand. If you were to evaporate all the water from the ocean and spread the remaining salt evenly across Earth's land surface, it would form a layer more than 160 meters thick. The salt in the ocean comes primarily from the gradual erosion of rocks on land. Rain falls, rivers form, and as water flows over into rocks, it slowly dissolves minerals, including sodium, chloride, magnesium, and many others, and carries them to the sea. Over billions of years, the steady input has accumulated into the salinity we observe today. The ocean salinity is not perfectly uniform. It varies from place to place based on evaporation, precipitation, and the input of fresh water from rivers and ice melt. Areas with high evaporation rates and low rainfall, like the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, tend to be salter than average. Areas near river mouths or in regions with heavy rainfall tend to be less salty. Salinity matters because it affects the density of water, and density differences are one of the main drivers of ocean circulation. Salter water is denser. Colder water is denser. Dense water sinks, lighter water rises. This simple physics, operating across the entire global ocean, sets great bodies of water into motion that circle the planet continuously. The salt in the ocean also makes it hospitable to the life that evolved within it. Marine organisms are adapted to seawater in very precise ways. The chemistry of their cells, the function of their organs, the balance of fluids within their bodies, all of it is calibrated to the saline environment they live in. The temperature of ocean water varies enormously from place to place and from depth to depth. At the surface, in tropical regions near the equator, water temperatures can reach 30 degrees Celsius or higher. The tropical ocean surface is warm, stratified, and relatively stable. A thin layer of warm water sits atop cooler water below, and the two do not mix easily. In polar regions, surface temperatures can drop to around -2 degrees Celsius, the freezing point of seawater, which is slightly lower than that of fresh water due to its salt content. At these temperatures, seawater begins to freeze from the top down, forming sea ice. As you descend through the ocean, temperatures drop rapidly through a region called the thermocline, a zone where water temperature decreases sharply with depth. Below the thermocline, in the deep ocean, temperatures settle into a very narrow and cold range, typically between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, and remain that way regardless of what is happening at the surface. This means that the vast majority of the ocean's volume is cold, not the warm, sunlit water tropical beaches that most people picture when they think of the sea, but cold, dark, stable water far below the reach of sunlight. The temperature of the ocean is not static. It changes seasonally at the surface, particularly in mid-latitude regions where summer and winter bring significant variation. It also changes over longer timescales. Ocean surface temperatures are closely linked to atmospheric temperatures, and shifts in one tend to be reflected in the other. The ocean plays a crucial role in regulating Earth's temperature. Water has a high heat capacity. It can absorb and store large amounts of heat without changing temperature dramatically. The ocean acts as a vast thermal buffer, absorbing heat from the atmosphere during warm periods and releasing it slowly during cooler ones. Without this buffering capacity, temperature swings on Earth's surface will be far more extreme than they are today. The ocean is never still. Even in the calmest conditions, even in the deepest and darkest parts where no wave or wind can reach, the water is moving, slowly, continuously, driven by forces that operate across the entire planet. Ocean currents are the great rivers of the sea. They flow in predictable patterns, following routes that have been more or less consistent for thousands of years. Some currents flow along the surface, driven largely by wind. Others flow deep below, driven by differences in temperature and salinity. The surface currents of the ocean are organized into large circular patterns called gyres. In each ocean basin, wind patterns and rotation of the Earth, a phenomenon called the Coriolis effect, cause surface water to rotate in great loops. In the northern hemisphere, these gyres rotate clockwise. In the southern hemisphere, they rotate counterclockwise. The Gulf Stream is perhaps the most well-known of the surface currents. It flows northward along the eastern coast of North America, and then across the Atlantic toward Europe. It carries warm tropical water into the North Atlantic, which has a moderating effect on the climate of northwestern Europe, making places like Britain and Scandinavia considerably warmer than they would otherwise be at their latitudes. Deep ocean currents are driven by thermohaline circulation, from the Greek words for heat and salt. When surface water in polar regions becomes very cold and salty, it becomes dense enough to sink to the ocean floor. This deep, cold water then flows along the bottom of the ocean, slowly making its way around the globe, eventually upwelling, rising back to the surface in other locations. The entire cycle takes roughly 1,000 years to complete one circuit. This thermohaline circulation is sometimes called the global ocean conveyor belt. It distributes heat, nutrients, and oxygen throughout the ocean. It connects every ocean basin on the planet, and it has been running in one form or another for millions of years. Tides are a different kind of movement, a rhythmic rising and falling of sea level caused primarily by the gravitational pull of the moon, with a smaller contribution from the sun. As the moon orbits Earth, its gravity pulls on the ocean, creating a bulge of water on the side of Earth facing the moon and a corresponding bulge on the opposite side. As Earth rotates, different parts of the coastline pass through these bulges, experiencing high tide. Most coastal locations experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day, though the timing and magnitude vary depending on the shape of the coastline and the local seafloor geometry. The difference between high tide and low tide can range from a few centimeters in enclosed seas to more than 15 meters in places with the right geography. The Bay of Fundy in eastern Canada is famous for having some of the most extreme tidal ranges on Earth. Tide-shaped coastlines influence marine life and create habitats. The intertidal zone, the area between the highest and lowest tide marks, that are among the most dynamic environments on the planet. The waves that arrive on a shoreline were not born there. Most ocean waves originate far out at sea, generated by wind. When wind blows across the surface of water, friction between moving air and water transfers energy into the sea. The water begins to form ripples, and if the wind continues, those ripples grow into chop, and the chop eventually organizes into swells. Long, rolling waves that can travel thousands of kilometers across open ocean before they ever reach land. The energy in a wave does not actually move the water from one place to another. Instead, it moves through the water. Individual water particles in a wave move in circular orbits, rising as the wave crest approaches, moving forward, sinking as the crest passes, and moving back. The wave shape travels forward, but the water itself stays roughly in place. This is why a piece of driftwood floating in open water bobs up and down as waves pass, but does not get carried forward by the waves themselves. It is the energy that moves, not the water. Waves are described by their height, wavelength, and period. The height is the vertical distance from the trough to the crest. The wavelength is the horizontal distance between 2 successive crests. The period is the time it takes for 2 successive crests to pass a fixed point. In open ocean, waves can be extraordinarily regular. Swells generated by distant storms travel in organized sets, their energy spreading outward from the source in all directions. By the time these swells have traveled thousands of kilometers, They have sorted themselves by wavelength and period, creating the long, smooth, rolling waves that surfers recognize as ideal conditions. When a wave reaches shallow water, when the depth of the seafloor becomes less than about half the wavelength, things change. The circular motion of water particles is interrupted by the bottom. The wave slows, its wavelength decreases, its height increases, and eventually it becomes unstable, tips forward, and breaks. The sound of waves breaking on a shore, that low, rhythmic rumble and hiss, is one of the oldest continuous sounds in the history of this planet. Long before there were trees or insects or any creature with ears to hear it, waves were breaking on shores, exactly as they do today. The floor of the ocean is not flat. Beneath the water lies a landscape as varied and dramatic as anything on land. Mountain ranges, vast plains, deep valleys, volcanoes, and plateaus. For most of human history, this landscape was completely unknown. Only in the last century or so, with the development of sonar and deep-sea exploration technology, has it become possible to map the seafloor in any detail. And what the mapping has revealed is extraordinary. The most prominent feature of the seafloor is the mid-ocean ridge system, a continuous underwater mountain range that winds through every ocean basin on the planet, extending more than 65,000 kilometers in total length. It is the longest mountain range on Earth, almost entirely submerged. The mid-ocean ridge marks the boundaries between tectonic plates that are slowly moving apart. As the plates separate, magma rises from below, cools, and forms new oceanic crust. This process, called seafloor spreading, is continuous and has been going on for millions of years. The continental shelves are the submerged edges of the continents, relatively shallow platforms of rock that extend from the coastline out to sea before dropping steeply into the deep ocean. The shelf can extend a few kilometers from shore or several hundred, depending on the geology. These shelf regions are among the most biologically productive parts of the ocean, where sunlight can reach the bottom and nutrients are plentiful. At the outer edge of the continental shelf, the seafloor drops away sharply in what is called the continental slope. Below the slope, the seafloor levels out into the abyssal plain, vast, flat stretches of fine sediment that cover much of the deep ocean floor. These sediments have accumulated over millions of years, made up of the remains of tiny organisms that lived in the water above and slowly drifted down after death. And then there are the trenches, long, narrow depressions in the seafloor that form where one tectonic plate slides beneath another. The Mariana Trench is the deepest, but there are dozens of others scattered throughout the oceans, particularly around the Pacific Rim. The seafloor is also dotted with hydrothermal vents, cracks in the crust where seawater seeps down into the hot rock, is superheated, and returns to the ocean as mineral-rich fluid. These vents create unique ecosystems that depend not on sunlight, but on chemical energy, one of the few environments on Earth where life does not ultimately trace its energy back to the sun. In 1977, a team of scientists in a deep-sea submersible was exploring the seafloor near the Galapagos Islands when they made one of the most unexpected discoveries in the history of biology. At a depth of around 2.5 kilometers, in total darkness, under enormous pressure, they found life, not a few scattered organisms, a thriving community, clusters of giant tube worms, some nearly 2 meters long, dense mats of bacteria, clams and mussels and crabs and shrimp, living in abundance, in a place where, by conventional understanding, almost nothing should have been able to survive. The source of energy for this entire community was not sunlight, it was chemistry. Hydrothermal vents work by a process in which seawater percolates down through cracks in the oceanic crust, contacts extremely hot rock, absorbs minerals and heat, and then rises back up through the seafloor as superheated, mineral-rich fluid. The temperature of the fluid emerging from these vents can exceed 400 degrees Celsius, far above the boiling point of water, but the extreme pressure prevents it from boiling. The minerals in this fluid, particularly hydrogen sulfide, provide the raw material for a completely different kind of food web. Certain bacteria can oxidize hydrogen sulfide, extracting energy from the reaction to build organic molecules. This process, called chemosynthesis, is the foundation of vent ecosystems. The way photosynthesis is a foundation of ecosystems based on sunlight. Everything else, the tube worms, the clams, the crabs, ultimately depends on these chemosynthetic bacteria. either by consuming them directly or by hosting them as internal symbionts. The discovery of hydrothermal vent ecosystems fundamentally expanded scientific understanding of where life can exist. It opened up the possibility that life might persist in other places in the solar system where liquid water exists in the absence of sunlight, beneath the ice of Jupiter's moon Europa, for example, or in the subsurface oceans of Saturn's moon Enceladus. It also underscored the extraordinary adaptability of life and the degree to which the ocean still holds surprises. Most of the life in the ocean is invisible to the naked eye. Plankton, from the Greek word meaning wanderer or drifter, are organisms that float in the water, largely carried by currents rather than swimming under their own power. They range from tiny bacteria to organisms that are just barely visible without magnification. Plankton are generally divided into two broad categories: phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phytoplankton are plant-like organisms that photosynthesize. They are the primary producers of the ocean, the living things that take sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and convert them into organic matter. They include a dazzling variety of forms: single-celled algae, diatoms with their intricate silica shells, dinoflagellates that can sometimes emit light. Phytoplankton are microscopic, individually invisible, but collectively enormous. A single teaspoon of seawater might contain millions of them. Phytoplankton are responsible for roughly half of the oxygen produced on Earth. Not the Amazon rainforest, not terrestrial forests. The tiny, invisible organisms drifting in the sunlit surface of the ocean. Every other breath a person takes was produced, in some sense, by these microscopic ocean organisms. Zooplankton are animal-like plankton, tiny creatures that cannot photosynthesize and must eat. Many are the larval stages of larger animals: baby crabs, juvenile fish, the young of barnacles, and sea urchins. Others are permanent members of the zooplankton community. Copepods, tiny crustaceans no bigger than a grain of rice, which are perhaps the most abundant animals on Earth. Krill are also zooplankton, a little larger than copepods, and crucial to the feeding of enormous animals like whales, seals, and penguins. The relationship between phytoplankton and zooplankton is one of the most fundamental interactions in the ocean. Zooplankton graze on phytoplankton, and in doing so, they transfer the energy fixed by photosynthesis into the food web. They are, in turn, eaten by larger creatures: fish, jellyfish, other marine animals, and those creatures are eaten by still larger ones. Almost everything in the ocean, no matter how large, traces its food supply back to these invisible drifters. Coral reefs are among the most biologically diverse ecosystems on the planet. They cover only a small fraction of the ocean floor, perhaps about 0.25% of total seafloor area. Yet they are home to an estimated 25% of all marine species. The concentration of life in a healthy coral reef is remarkable. Thousands of species of fish, invertebrates, algae, and microorganisms all share in a relatively small space. Coral, despite its rock-like appearance, is an animal, or rather, it is a colony of animals, tiny organisms called coral polyps, related to jellyfish and sea anemones. Each polyp is a small, soft creature with a ring of tentacles surrounding a mouth. The hard structure that most people think of as coral is actually the calcium carbonate skeleton secreted by these polyps, accumulated over time into the solid reef structure. Inside the tissues of coral polyps lie photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae. This relationship is one of the most important partnerships in the ocean. The algae, receiving a protected home and exposure to sunlight, produce sugars through photosynthesis, nutrients that feed the coral. The coral, in turn, provides shelter and the carbon dioxide the algae need. It is a mutual arrangement that supports the entire reef. Coral reefs typically develop in warm, clear, shallow tropical waters, conditions that allow sunlight to reach the reef and support the algae within the coral tissue. The reefs grow slowly, with some coral species adding only a centimeter or two of new skeleton per year. A large reef system may represent thousands or tens of thousands of years of continuous growth. The Great Barrier Reef off the northeastern coast of Australia is the largest coral reef system in the world, extending more than 2,300 kilometers. It is large enough to be visible from space. It supports an extraordinary range of life. More than 1,500 species of fish, 4,000 types of mollusks, and hundreds of species of coral. A healthy coral reef is a busy, complex, living structure. Fish of countless varieties move through its tunnels and crevices. Octopuses rest in its shadows. Sea turtles graze on the seagrasses nearby. Sharks patrol its outer edges. The visual richness and density of life in a healthy reef is unlike almost anything else in nature. Beyond the coastal zones, beyond the continental shelves and the reefs, lies the open ocean. The pelagic zone, the open water away from any coastline or seafloor, makes up the largest habitat on Earth by volume. It is vast, and in many ways is defined by its emptiness. There are no fixed surfaces to anchor to, no seafloor close enough to matter, no coastline to navigate by. Life in the open ocean must be adapted to existing in an essentially featureless, three-dimensional medium that stretches in every direction. And yet the open ocean is full of life. The great filter feeders move through it. Baleen whales, the largest animals on Earth, swimming slowly through productive waters with their mouths open, straining enormous quantities of krill and small fish from the water. A blue whale, the largest animal known to have ever existed, may consume around 4 tons of krill in a single day during the feeding season. It travels hundreds or even thousands of kilometers to reach the areas where krill are most concentrated. Tuna, among the fastest fish in the ocean, patrol the open water in loosely organized groups. They are built for sustained, high-speed swimming, warm-blooded, unlike most fish, which allows their muscles to function efficiently in cold water. They range across entire ocean basins during their lives, tracking the movements of the prey they depend on. Sharks, ancient animals with relatives going back more than 400 million years, are found throughout the open ocean. The oceanic white-tipped shark ranges through tropical and subtropical waters far from any coastline. A permanent resident of the open sea, the whale shark, the largest fish alive, drifts slowly through warm surface waters, filtering plankton from enormous volumes of water. Dolphins and porpoises navigate the open ocean in groups, communicating with complex patterns of clicks and whistles. They are curious, highly mobile creatures, capable of traveling long distances and diving to considerable depths. The open ocean also contains organisms that are hard to categorize in familiar terms. Jellyfish drifting on currents, salps forming long colonial chains, siphonophores that can extend for tens of meters. Technically a single colonial organism made up of hundreds of individual zooids, each with its own specialized function. In the open ocean, space is a defining constraint. Everything is adapted to moving through it, finding food within it, and reproducing the absence of anything solid to hold on to. Sea turtles have been swimming in the world's oceans for an extraordinarily long time. Their ancestors appeared more than 100 million years ago in a world populated by dinosaurs. The seas they moved through were different. The continents were arranged differently. The ocean currents followed different paths. But the basic form of the sea turtle, that smooth, streamlined body with flattened flippers instead of legs, was already established. It has changed relatively little since. There are 7 species of sea turtle alive today. They range in size from the relatively small Kemp's Ridley, which weighs around 45 kilograms, to the leatherback, the largest of the sea turtles, which can weigh more than 900 kilograms and stretch to nearly 2.5 meters in length. The leatherback is also distinctive in that it lacks the hard, rigid shell of other sea turtles. Instead, its shell is flexible and covered in rubbery, leathery skin. Sea turtles spend almost their entire lives in the ocean. They are air breathers, surfacing regularly to breathe, but otherwise they are aquatic. They can remain submerged for extended periods. During rest, a sea turtle's heart rate slows dramatically and its metabolism decreases, allowing it to stay underwater for several hours. Different species feed in different ways. Green sea turtles feed primarily on seagrasses and algae, and as adults they are almost entirely herbivorous. Loggerheads have powerful jaws suited to crushing hard-shell prey like crabs and mollusks. Hawksbills feed on sea sponges. Leatherbacks feed almost exclusively on jellyfish and other soft-bodied organisms, diving to considerable depths to find them. The migrations of sea turtles are remarkable. Female sea turtles return to lay their eggs on the same beaches where they themselves hatched, sometimes traveling thousands of kilometers from their feeding grounds to reach those beaches. They use the Earth's magnetic field to navigate. detecting subtle variations in the field that allow them to identify specific locations on the globe with extraordinary precision. Nesting females come ashore at night, dig a nest in the sand above the tide line, deposit their eggs, typically 100 or more per clutch, and return to the sea. The eggs incubate in the warm sand for around 2 months. When the hatchlings emerge, they instinctively move toward the sea, guided by the brighter horizon of the open water. Those that survive can live for a very long time. Sea turtles can live for several decades, possibly longer in some cases. Sound travels differently in water than in air. In air, sound moves at roughly 340 meters per second. In seawater, it travels at about 1,500 meters per second, more than 4 times faster. It also travels farther. The ocean is, in some ways, an extraordinarily good medium for sound. Marine animals have evolved to take advantage of this. The acoustic world of the ocean is rich and complex. A continuous soundscape of clicks, groans, pulses, and calls that overlap and interact across vast distances. The songs of humpback whales are perhaps the most well-known example. Male humpback whales produce long, complex sequences of sounds during the breeding season, patterns that can last for hours and repeat with remarkable consistency. These songs are not fixed. They evolve over time within a population, with new phrases gradually replacing old ones, so that the song is somewhat different from one year to the next. Populations in different parts of the ocean sing different songs, and novel phrases can spread from one group to another. Blue whales produce low-frequency calls that are among the loudest sounds made by any biological organism, powerful enough to be detected by hydrophones thousands of kilometers away. The infrasound they produce, at frequencies sometimes too low for human hearing, can propagate across entire ocean basins. The function of these calls is not fully understood, but they are thought to be involved in communication between individuals and possibly in navigation. Sperm whales communicate with patterns of clicks called codas, specific rhythmic sequences that identify individuals and social groups. Sperm whales live in complex social groups, primarily composed of females and young animals, and their communication appears to be sophisticated and learned rather than innate. Different family groups have different repertoires of codas. Dolphins use a system of echolocation, producing rapid series of clicks and listening to the echoes that return to build a detailed picture of their surroundings. They can detect the shape, size, and texture of objects in the water in complete darkness. The ocean is never silent. Even in the deep places far from any coast, there is always sound. The low creaking of the seafloor, the distant calls of whales, the clicking of shrimp, the faint groaning of ice. It is a world experienced as much through sound as through any other sense. In the deep ocean, where sunlight cannot reach, many organisms create their own light. This phenomenon, bioluminescence, is the biological production of light through chemical reactions within living tissue. It is far more common in the ocean than on land, and it occurs in an extraordinary range of organisms: bacteria, dinoflagellates, jellyfish, squid, fish, and many others. The chemistry behind bioluminescence typically involves a molecule called luciferin reacting with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme called luciferase, releasing energy in the form of light. The light produced is usually blue or blue-green in color, wavelengths that travel well through water. Some organisms produce green or yellow light, and a few produce red, which is useful in particular circumstances because many deep-sea animals have no receptor for red light and cannot see it. Bioluminescence serves many different purposes depending on the organism. In the deep sea, many predatory fish use bioluminescent lures to attract prey. The anglerfish is a familiar example. It has a modified dorsal spine tipped with a small, luminescent bulb that dangles in front of its mouth. Small animals attracted by the glow swim into striking range. Other animals use bioluminescence for camouflage. In the twilight zone, where faint sunlight filters from above, an animal viewed from below is silhouetted against a dim light. Some species, certain squid and fish, have rows of light-producing organs along their undersides that match the intensity of the downwelling light, making them effectively invisible to predators looking up from below. In surface waters, some species of dinoflagellate produce brief flashes of bioluminescence when disturbed. This is a source of the sparkling, glowing water, sometimes seen at night in the wake of a boat or in breaking waves. The flashes are produced as a defense mechanism. The sudden light may startle a predator or draw the attention of an animal that would eat the predator. The deep ocean, on a global scale, is lit not by the sun but by the quiet, cold light of living things. It is one of the stranger, more quietly beautiful features of the world that has had billions of years to develop its own solutions. Octopuses are animals that are difficult to fit into familiar categories. They are mollusks, related to clams, snails, and oysters, and yet they share almost none of the characteristics that typically define that group. They have no shell. They have 8 flexible arms, each lined with suckers that can grip, taste, and sense their surroundings. Their bodies are almost entirely soft, with only a small, flexible internal structure. They are also, by any reasonable measure, intelligent. Octopuses have the largest brains, relative to body size, of any invertebrate. They can learn, remember, solve problems, and distinguish between different individuals, including individual humans who interact with them regularly. In research settings, octopuses have navigated mazes, opened childproof containers, recognized patterns, and demonstrated what appears to be a capacity for play. Their nervous system is unusual. About 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are not in its central brain, but distributed throughout its arms. Each arm has a degree of autonomy. It can process information and respond to stimuli somewhat independently of the central brain. An octopus does not fully control every movement of every arm. Rather, it sets general intentions, and each arm executes them using its own local processing. Octopuses are masters of camouflage. They can change the color, pattern, and texture of their skin in a fraction of a second, using specialized cells called chromatophores, iridophores, and papillae. They can flatten their skin, raise it into complex textures, and adjust the reflectivity of their surface to match almost any background. Despite their intelligence, octopuses are mostly solitary animals with short lifespans. Many species live only 1 to 2 years. They typically reproduce once, and many species die shortly after their eggs hatch. Octopuses are found in all the world's oceans, from shallow tropical reefs to the deep sea. They are a reminder that intelligence, in its various forms, has evolved multiple times independently in the history of life, and that it can take shapes very different from anything familiar along the cold, rocky coastlines of the world, particularly along the western edges of continents, where cold, nutrient-rich water upwells from the deep. There exist some of the most visually striking ecosystems on Earth. Kelp forests. Kelp are large brown algae that anchor themselves to the rocky seafloor with a structure called a holdfast and grow upward toward the light. They can reach lengths of more than 45 meters, growing in some conditions at rates of up to 60 centimeters per day, among the fastest growth rates of any organism. In productive conditions, a kelp forest can be extraordinarily dense, the long, strap-like fronds reaching from the seafloor to the surface and beyond, creating a canopy that filters and diffuses the sunlight passing through it. Moving through a kelp forest is, by many accounts, a profoundly quiet experience. The fronds sway gently with the current. The light filters down in shifting patterns. The kelp forest creates layers. The canopy at the surface. The understory is smaller algae and encrusting organisms below, and the forest floor covered in sea urchins, sea stars, and the holdfast structures of the kelp itself. The ecological complexity of kelp forests is considerable. More than 800 species of plants and animals have been identified in the kelp forests of California alone. Fish shelter in the forest architecture. Sea otters, where they are present, wrap themselves in kelp fronds to anchor themselves while they sleep at the surface. The presence or absence of sea urchins plays a pivotal role in kelp forest dynamics. Sea urchins eat kelp, and when their populations are controlled by predators, sea otters, sunflower sea stars, the kelp forest can thrive. When predator populations decline, sea urchin populations can increase significantly, consuming kelp at a rate that can strip entire sections of seafloor. Kelp forests are found along the coast of California, British Columbia, southern South America, South Africa, southern Australia, and New Zealand. Each of these forests has its own community of species, shaped by local conditions, but all share the same basic structure: the long, reaching fronds, the filtered light, the layered life. At the top and bottom of the world, the ocean takes on a different character. The Arctic Ocean, surrounded by land masses, is largely covered by sea ice for much of the year. The ice is not permanent. It expands in winter and contracts in summer, and it is dynamic, cracking and reforming drifting with winds and currents. Beneath and within this ice, life exists in conditions that would be lethal to most organisms. Polar seas are cold, extraordinarily so, and much of the year they are dark, during the polar winter. Sunlight does not reach these latitudes for months at a time, and yet, when summer comes and the sun returns, rising above the horizon and not setting for weeks, the burst of light triggers an explosion of phytoplankton growth that supports enormous populations of zooplankton, fish, seabirds, and marine mammals. The Arctic Ocean supports populations of bowhead whales, narwhals, and beluga whales. Ringed seals and bearded seals rest on the ice. Polar bears depend on the sea ice as a platform from which to hunt seals, making them as much a feature of the ocean as of the land. The Southern Ocean, surrounding Antarctica, is in some ways even more productive. The circumpolar current that moves continuously around Antarctica mixes deep, nutrient-rich water toward the surface, creating conditions that support vast populations of Antarctic krill. These small crustaceans, fingernail-sized, semi-transparent, traveling in aggregations so dense they can be visible from the air, are the cornerstone of the Southern Ocean food web. Krill feed emperor penguins and chinstrap penguins and genda penguins. They feed leopard seals and crab-eater seals, the latter being among the most abundant large mammals on Earth. They feed blue whales and fin whales and humpback whales, which travel to the Southern Ocean each summer to feed before returning to warmer waters to breed. The polar oceans are harsh environments by most measures, but they are not inhospitable. Life in these regions has found ways not just to survive, but to flourish, and to support some of the largest populations of some of the largest animals on the planet. Below 1,000 meters, the ocean is completely dark. Not dim, not shadowy. Completely dark. Not a single photon of sunlight penetrates to these depths. The water is cold, within a few degrees of freezing, and the pressure is hundreds of times greater than at the surface. And yet, there is life here, not the abundance of the sunlit zone, or the moderate communities of the twilight zone, but life nonetheless, adapted in remarkable ways to conditions that seem, from a surface perspective, almost impossibly hostile. Deep-sea fish have evolved a range of adaptations to their lightless environment. Many are black or dark red, colors that are effectively invisible in deep water, providing camouflage. Some have enormous eyes that can detect the faintest traces of bioluminescent light. Others have no functional eyes at all and rely entirely on other senses. Many deep-sea fish have unusual proportions, large mouths, extendable jaws, hinged teeth, long fawn-like structures that can fold backward to allow prey to enter but not escape. In an environment where encounters with food may be rare and unpredictable, the ability to capture and consume whatever is encountered, regardless of size, is a significant advantage. The black swallower can consume fish larger than itself. The viper fish has fangs so large that when its mouth is closed, the teeth extend outside the jaw. The barrel-eye fish has transparent, tubular eyes pointing upward that can rotate to detect bioluminescent flashes from above. In the midnight zone, marine snow drifts continuously downward, a constant, slow fall of organic particles from the waters above, dead plankton, discarded mucus webs, fragments of larger organisms, all sinking slowly toward the bottom, carrying the energy fixed by photosynthesis at the surface down into the dark interior. This downward drift of organic material is the primary food supply for most of the deep ocean. It connects the sunlit world at the top to the cold, pressurized world at the bottom. The ocean and the atmosphere are not separate systems. They exchange heat, moisture, and gases continuously, and together they determine much of what happens with weather and climate across the entire surface of the planet. The ocean absorbs solar radiation at the surface and stores it as heat. This heat is then transferred to the atmosphere through evaporation and direct conduction. Water that evaporates from the ocean's surface rises as water vapor into the atmosphere, where it eventually condenses into clouds and falls as rain. In some cases, thousands of kilometers from where it evaporated. The ocean is the primary source of moisture for the global water cycle. The patterns of sea surface temperature influence where and how intensely precipitation occurs. Warm ocean water provides more energy to the overlying atmosphere, which can intensify weather systems that form above it. Tropical cyclones, hurricanes, and typhoons are powered by warm ocean water. They form and intensify over warm tropical seas, drawing energy from the heat and moisture at the ocean surface. The El Nino Southern Oscillation is one of the most significant examples of ocean-atmosphere interaction. Under normal conditions, strong trade winds push warm surface water westward across the tropical Pacific. When these winds weaken periodically, in what is called an El Nino event, the warm water spreads eastward towards South America, and the pattern of rainfall across the entire tropical region shifts. El Nino events affect weather from Australia to South America to East Africa, causing droughts in some regions and floods in others. The ocean also absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Seawater and the atmosphere are constantly exchanging carbon dioxide. When the concentration in the atmosphere is higher than the ocean, carbon dioxide dissolves into the water. This has made the ocean a significant carbon sink, absorbing a substantial portion of the carbon dioxide present in the atmosphere. The interactions between ocean and atmosphere are complex, interconnected, and global in scale. They are why a temperature change in the tropical Pacific can affect rainfall in India, why the ocean and sky cannot really be understood separately at all. When seawater freezes, it does something interesting. As salt water cools towards freezing point, the salt molecules become increasingly excluded from forming ice crystals. The ice that forms is largely fresh. Much of the salt is left behind in the surrounding water, making that water salter and denser. This dense, cold water sinks, playing a role in the thermohaline circulation that drives deep ocean currents. The sea ice itself forms as thin ice crystals called fragile ice on the surface, which then consolidate into pancake ice, small, rounded plates that jostle together in waves, before eventually thickening and consolidating into pack ice. At its maximum extent, Antarctic sea ice covers an area of about 18 to 20 million square kilometers, roughly twice the area of the Antarctic continent beneath it. Arctic sea ice covers a similar area at its winter maximum. Sea ice is not static. It moves with currents and winds, fracturing into leads, open water channels, and pressure ridges where flows collide and push ice upward into irregular forms. The surface of sea ice is a landscape of its own, flat expanses of white, pressure ridges that can rise several meters above the general level, pools of meltwater in summer, and areas of thicker, multi-year ice that has survived more than one seasonal melt cycle. Beneath the sea ice, a distinctive community of organisms exists. Ice algae colonize the underside of sea ice, taking advantage of the cold, stable surface to photosynthesize. These ice algae are a crucial early-season food source, particularly in the Antarctic, where they can be the first significant food available after the long, dark winter. The undersurface of sea ice, viewed from below, has an irregular, complex texture, a ceiling of ice above an open ocean below, filtered blue light coming through in places, darkness in others. For organisms adapted to this environment, the boundary between ice and water is a rich, productive zone. Twice each day, the tides change the world at the edge of the ocean. The intertidal zone, the strip of coastline that is alternately submerged and exposed by the rising and falling tide, is one of the most physically demanding environments in nature. Organisms living here must tolerate being underwater and then expose the air to drying, to extremes of temperature, and to the physical force of breaking waves. And yet it is also one of the most densely populated habitats on Earth. Rocky intertidal zones are organized into distinct bands, each populated by organisms adapted to the specific conditions of that level of the shore. At the highest levels, reached only by the highest tides and the spray from breaking waves, only the most tolerant species persist. Periwinkles and limpets that can survive long periods of desiccation by closing their shells tightly against the rock. Lower on the shore, barnacles encrust the rock in dense colonies. These crustaceans spend most of their lives sealed inside their calcareous shells, waiting for the tide to return. When the water returns, they open small doors and extend feathery cirri, modified legs, to filter plankton from the water. Below the barnacle zone, mussels form dense aggregations, their shells packed so tightly together that they create a three-dimensional habitat, a matrix of shells and water and organic matter that shelters dozens of other species. Sea stars move through the mussel beds, their tube feet gripping the shells, their stomachs extruded outward to digest prey outside their bodies. In the low intertidal, reached only at the lowest tides, more delicate organisms appear. Sea urchins, anemones, nudibranch, Small fish sheltering in tide pools. These tide pools, isolated pockets of seawater trapped among rocks as the tide recedes, are miniature ecosystems, warming in the sun, becoming more saline as water evaporates, and then refreshed when the tide returns. The intertidal zone is a place of regular, predictable change. The organisms that live here have not merely survived its rhythms. They depend on them. The deep sea is home to some of the most unusual animals on the planet. Removed from the selective pressures of a brightly lit, visually complex environment, deep-sea organisms have evolved along paths that produce forms quite different from anything in the shallower zones. The giant squid, long a creature of legend and rumor, is real, and it lives in the deep ocean. It can reach lengths of 12 to 13 meters, making it one of the largest invertebrates on Earth. Its eyes are among the largest of any animal, up to 30 centimeters in diameter, adapted to detect the faint bioluminescent flashes of the deep. Most of what scientists know about them comes from specimens found in the stomachs of sperm whales and from a few camera recordings made of living animals in their natural environment. The colossal squid is larger still, with more massive body than the giant squid, though not necessarily longer. It lives in the waters around Antarctica. The giant isopod is a crustacean found on the deep seafloor, related to the pill bugs found in gardens. They can grow to around 45 centimeters in length, a size consistent with a deep-sea phenomenon called abyssal gigantism, where certain invertebrate species grow substantially larger in the deep ocean than their shallow water relatives. The goblin shark, discovered in the late 19th century, is a pale, soft-bodied shark with a distinctive elongated snout and highly extensible jaws that can project forward to capture prey. It lives in the deep ocean around the world and is rarely observed. The fangtooth fish has teeth so disproportionately large that it is unable to close its mouth completely. The lower fangs fit into special pockets near its brain when its mouth is closed. These are not unusual exceptions. They are the ordinary residents of the deep, animals that have lived in these conditions long enough to become perfectly suited to them. From the perspective of the deep ocean, it is the surface world that will be the strange and inhospitable place. In the shallow coastal waters of tropical and subtropical regions, and in some temperate zones as well, there exist meadows of seagrass. Seagrasses are flowering plants. True plants, unlike seaweeds, which are algae, they evolve from land plants and return to the sea, developing the ability to survive fully submerged in salt water. They have roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. They reproduce both by flowering and by extending their root systems through the sediment. Seagrass meadows are calm, quiet habitats. The long, slender leaves sway gently in the current, filtering sediment from the water and creating a sheltered environment close to the seafloor. The meadows grow in areas with enough light for photosynthesis to occur, usually in water no more than a few meters deep. Within a seagrass meadow, life is abundant if understated. Small fish shelter among the leaves. Invertebrates, small crabs, sea cucumbers, polychaete worms move through the sediment. Seahorses hold themselves upright among the stems, using their prehensile tails to grip the grass as they hunt for tiny crustaceans. Green sea turtles are primary grazers of seagrass meadows, cropping the leaves and keeping the meadow healthy by preventing the accumulation of old, decaying material on the leaf tips. Dugongs, large, placid marine mammals related to manatees, graze seagrass meadows in the Indo-Pacific, uprooting entire plants with their horseshoe-shaped muzzles and consuming roots, rhizomes, and leaves. Seagrass meadows are also important nursery habitat for many species of fish. The density of the vegetation provides shelter for juvenile fish during the early, vulnerable stages of their lives. Seagrasses stabilize sediment with their root systems, preventing erosion. Their leaves slow water movement, encouraging the settling of suspended particles and improving water clarity. And they produce oxygen through photosynthesis. Seagrass meadows are among the more effective carbon storage systems in the coastal ocean and the shallow coastal waters of tropical and subtropical regions. And in some temperate zones as well, there exist meadows of seagrass. Seagrasses are flowering plants. True plants, unlike seaweeds, which are algae, they evolve from land plants and return to the sea, developing the ability to survive fully submerged in salt water. They have roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. They reproduce both by flowering and by extending their root systems through the sediment. Seagrass meadows are calm, quiet habitats. The long, slender leaves sway gently in the current, filtering sediment from the water and creating a sheltered environment close to the seafloor. The meadows grow in areas with enough light for photosynthesis to occur, usually in water no more than a few meters deep. Within a seagrass meadow, life is abundant if understated. Small fish shelter among the leaves. Invertebrates, small crabs, sea cucumbers, polychaete worms move through the sediment. Seahorses hold themselves upright among the stems, using their prehensile tails to grip the grass as they hunt for tiny crustaceans. Green sea turtles are primary grazers of seagrass meadows, cropping the leaves and keeping the meadow healthy by preventing the accumulation of old, decaying material on the leaf tips. Dugongs, large, placid marine mammals related to manatees, graze seagrass meadows in the Indo-Pacific, uprooting entire plants with their horseshoe-shaped muzzles and consuming roots, rhizomes, and leaves. Seagrass meadows are also important nursery habitat for many species of fish. The density of the vegetation provides shelter for juvenile fish during the early, vulnerable stages of their lives. Seagrasses stabilize sediment with their root systems, preventing erosion. Their leaves slow water movement, encouraging the settling of suspended particles and improving water clarity, and they produce oxygen through photosynthesis. Seagrass meadows are among the more effective carbon storage systems in the coastal ocean. Some of the most familiar and recognizable animals in the ocean are not fish, not invertebrates, not ancient organisms with no close relatives on land. They are mammals. Whales, dolphins, porpoises, seals, sea lions, walruses, manatees, dugongs, and sea otters are all mammals, warm-blooded, air-breathing, giving birth to live young, nursing those young with milk. They evolved from land ancestors and returned to the water, carrying the fundamental biology of terrestrial mammals into an aquatic world. The transition from land to sea appears in the fossil record in stages, particularly well documented in the ancestors of modern whales and dolphins. The earliest whale ancestors were four-legged land animals, similar in build to even-toed ungulates like deer and hippos. Over tens of millions of years, successive lineages became progressively more aquatic, limbs shortening and becoming paddle-like, hind limbs reducing and eventually disappearing, nostrils migrating to the top of the head, body shape becoming more streamlined. Different marine mammal groups have different relationships with the water. Cetaceans, whales, and dolphins spend their entire lives in the ocean. Their hind limbs are internally vestigial, reduced to small pelvic bones buried in the body wall, with no external trace. They breathe through blowholes on top of their heads. Pinnipeds, seals, sea lions, and walruses are more amphibious. They come ashore to rest, to give birth, and to nurse their pups. They move awkwardly on land, but are extraordinary swimmers, able to dive to depths that would be lethal to unprotected humans, and to remain underwater for extended periods. Sirenia, manatees, and dugongs are slow-moving, herbivorous mammals that never leave the water. They are distantly related to elephants, a lineage that went its own way toward the sea. Sea otters maintain their body temperature not with a thick layer of blubber, as most marine mammals do, but with the densest fur of any animal on Earth, up to 1 million hairs per square centimeter. They sleep at the surface, sometimes wrapped in kelp fronds, floating on their backs. The presence of mammals in the ocean, animals so recently arrived in evolutionary terms, still carrying the basic blueprint of a land creature, is a reminder that the ocean is not just a permanent fixture, but an ongoing destination. The floor of the deep ocean is covered in sediment, layer upon layer of it, accumulated over millions of years, so slowly that in some places the rate of accumulation is just a few millimeters per 1,000 years. But over geological time, the layers add up. This sediment is a record, a detailed, continuous archive of conditions in the ocean and atmosphere above. Scientists can drill cores from the seafloor, extracting columns of sediment that span millions of years, and read from them the history of ocean temperatures, circulation patterns, ice ages, and biological communities. The sediment is largely biological in origin. In the sunlit zone above, billions of tiny organisms live and die. And when they die, their remains sink, some dissolving the water column, others settling to the bottom. The shells of foraminifera, single-celled organisms with elaborate calcium carbonate shells, accumulate on the seafloor in enormous quantities. The silica frustules of diatoms and radiolaria form another layer. The scales and teeth of fish, the bones of whales, the tests of sea urchins, all eventually reach the bottom and are incorporated into the sediment. In areas far from land, where no riverborne sediment reaches, the seafloor can be covered in a particularly fine, soft ooze composed almost entirely of biological remains, the accumulated material of countless generations of surface life slowly drifting downward. In some parts of the deep ocean, the seafloor is covered in polymetallic nodules, roughly potato-shaped lumps of manganese, iron, nickel, copper, and cobalt that form by the slow accretion of minerals around a nucleus, growing a few millimeters per million years. They cover vast areas of the abyssal plain in certain ocean basins. The seafloor is a library. It holds information about the past that cannot be recovered from anywhere else. A compressed, layered record of what the ocean and climate have been like across geological time, along tropical and subtropical coastlines, where the land meets the sea in shallow, sheltered bays and estuaries. There's a habitat unlike any other: mangrove forests. Mangroves are trees, some shrub-like, some reaching 15 meters or more in height, that grow in saltwater or brackish water in the intertidal zone. They represent a specialized adaptation to an environment that would kill most land plants within days. Soil saturated with salt water, poor in oxygen, subject to regular flooding by the tide. To manage the salt, different species of mangrove use different strategies. Some exclude salt at the root level, filtering it out before it enters the plant's vascular system. Others allow salt to enter and then concentrate in older leaves that eventually drop off, removing the salt from the plant system. A few species can excrete salt directly through their leaves. The root systems of mangroves are one of their most visually striking features. Many species develop prop roots, arching roots that extend to the trunk and lower branches down into mud, creating a lattice of support that holds the tree stable against the movement of tides and water. Others develop nematophores, specialized root structures that grow upward out of the anaerobic mud, providing oxygen to the root system. Within the tangled root system of a mangrove forest, a distinctive community assembles. Small fish shelter there during high tide, using the roots as protection from larger predators that cannot navigate the complex structure. Crabs, both land crabs and marine species, occupy the forest floor and climb the roots and trunks. Oysters and barnacles encrust the submerged portions of the roots. Mangrove forests are important nursery habitats. Many species of commercially important fish and shrimp spend early stages of their lives in the mangroves before moving to open water as adults. They also stabilize coastlines. Their root systems bind sediment and reduce erosion, protecting the land behind them from wave action and storm surge. A mangrove forest is a quiet, complex place. The sound of water moving through roots, birds calling from the canopy, crabs moving over mud at low tide, fish rising at the surface in the shaded pools between the trees. When the tide retreats, it leaves behind small pools of seawater trapped in depressions of rocky shores. Tide pools. Each one is a small, complete world, isolated from the open ocean for the hours between tides, subject to its own local conditions. In summer, a tide pool may warm significantly in the sun, reaching temperatures far above those of the surrounding sea. Evaporation increases its salinity. Fresh rainwater may dilute it. Its oxygen level changes as organisms within it photosynthesize during the day and respire at night. And yet within these pools, life is abundant. Small fish, blennies, gobies, tide pool sculpins shelter in the deepest parts of larger pools, darting through the water. Sea anemones expand their tentacle crowns in the water, contracting into compact forms when the tide leaves them exposed. Shore crabs move across the bottom and up the walls of the pool. Hermit crabs negotiate for shells. Purple sea urchins wedge themselves into crevices in the rock. The algae within tide pools provide both food and oxygen. Green algae coat the surfaces. Coralline algae, which deposit calcium carbonate and feel rough and hard to the touch, paint the rocks in shades of pink and lavender. Tide pools have long been a gateway to understanding marine life. Accessible to observation without specialized equipment, they have been places of learning for centuries. Many marine biologists trace their first serious engagement with the ocean to childhood hours spent at tide pools. There is something endlessly interesting about a tide pool, Even without scientific intent, the water moves gently. Small creatures go about their routines. The colors and textures are remarkable. The translucence of anemone tentacles, the iridescence of fish scale, the intricate symmetry of the sea urchin spines. And every 6 hours or so, the tide returns, flooding the pool, reconnecting its isolated world to the vast ocean beyond. The ocean does not sleep. Night and day mean different things at sea than on land, especially in the open ocean and in the deep. But even at the surface, where sunlight matters, the ocean at night is not quiet. Many animals that remain at depth during the day rise toward the surface at night in what is called vertical migration, one of the largest coordinated animal movements on Earth. As the light fades in the late afternoon and evening, enormous numbers of small crustaceans, small fish, jellyfish, and other zooplankton ascend from the mesopelagic zone into the surface waters, where phytoplankton is concentrated. They feed through the night, then descend again before dawn. This migration happens across every ocean, every night. The total biomass involved is very large, and the predators that feed on them, tuna, swordfish, sharks, seabirds, and whales, adjust their own behavior accordingly, timing their feeding to match the vertical availability of their prey. Squid are among the most active nocturnal predators in the open ocean. Many species hunt at the surface or in the upper water column at night, pursuing fish and other prey with their long tentacles and sharp beaks. In some regions, squid aggregations at the surface at night are so dense that they have historically been fished by lamplight, the lights attracting the squid from the dark water below. Bioluminescence is more visible at night, and surface waters in many parts of the ocean produce flashes and glows as dinoflagellates are disturbed, the effect of swimming through bioluminescent water at night. Each movement producing trails and swirls of cold blue-green light is described by many who have experienced it as one of the more remarkable sensory experiences available in the natural world. On calm, clear nights at sea, far from any land, the ocean surface reflects the sky. The stars above and their reflections below create a sense of being surrounded by light, suspended in a darkness that is full of light between the star-filled sky and its mirrored image on the still water. Where rivers reach the sea, something in between forms. Estuaries are semi-enclosed bodies of water where fresh water from rivers mixes with salt water from the ocean. They are transition zones, neither fully freshwater nor fully marine, and the constant mixing of fresh and salt water creates conditions unlike those in either environment. Salinity in an estuary varies with location, with the season, with rainfall, and with the state of tide. Near the river mouth, where freshwater input is strong, salinity may be low. Near the ocean entrance, it approaches marine levels. In between, there is a gradient, and the exact position of that gradient shifts constantly with the ebb and flow of tides and the rise and fall of river discharge. Despite, or perhaps because of, this variability, estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth. The meeting of freshwater and saltwater, the regular tidal flushing, and the input of nutrients from the surrounding land combine to create conditions for extraordinary biological activity. Many commercially important fish and shellfish depend on estuaries for part of their life cycle. Oysters, mussels, and clams filter feed in the nutrient-rich estuarine waters. Juvenile fish shelter in the marsh grasses, feeding on the abundant small invertebrates and growing quickly before moving into open water. Migratory birds gather in estuaries in enormous numbers, particularly during migration periods. The mudflats exposed at low tide are rich with invertebrates, worms, clams, small crustaceans, providing fuel for birds traveling thousands of kilometers between their breeding and wintering grounds. The physical character of an estuary changes with every tide. At high tide, salt marsh grasses stand in water, the marsh surface submerged. At low tide, they stand in air, the mud between them exposed. It is a landscape that is different depending on the hour you visit it, and animals that depend on it have timed their activities precisely to the tides. The ocean is not always blue, or rather, the ocean is blue. Seawater absorbs the red and yellow wavelengths of sunlight more readily than blue. So pure, clear seawater reflects blue back to the eye. This is why deep, open ocean water appears such a vivid, saturated blue. It is extremely clear, and what you are seeing is the color of light itself being filtered through and scattered by the water. But not all ocean water is clear and blue. In coastal regions, in estuaries near river mouths, and in productive open ocean areas, the water takes on other colors. Green water indicates the presence of phytoplankton. The chlorophyll and other photosynthetic pigments in these microscopic organisms absorb red and blue light for photosynthesis, but reflect green. Dense phytoplankton blooms can turn large areas of ocean a deep murky green. This coloration is often associated with high biological productivity. Green water tends to support more marine life than clear blue water, simply because it has more food in it. Brownish or reddish water near coastlines often reflects the input of sediment and organic material from rivers and land runoff. The Mississippi River carries enormous quantities of fine sediment from the American interior and delivers it to the Gulf of Mexico, creating a visible plume of colored water extending far offshore. Certain algal blooms, particularly those involving red pigmented dinoflagellates, can turn ocean water red or orange. These blooms are a natural occurrence in many coastal waters. At the surface, the color of the ocean also changes with the angle of the sun, with cloud cover, with the state of the sea surface, and with the depth and composition of the water below. At dawn and dusk, the ocean can be gold or pink or deep red. In stormlight, it can be a dark, opaque gray. The ocean contains every color. But when the sun is high and the water is clear and deep, it is blue. And that blue, in the right conditions, is one of the most intense and saturating colors visible in the natural world. There is a quality to sound at the sea surface that is distinct from any other environment. On a calm day, the ocean surface makes very little noise, a gentle lapping. The small sounds of wavelets, not quite waves, just a slight disturbance of wind on water, the creak of a boat hull, the distant call of a seabird. In light wind, the ocean begins to develop a background sound, a broad, continuous presence, the millions of small wavelets generating together a low hiss that fills all the other sound. This sound is called the sound of the sea, and it is one of the oldest sounds in the world. In stronger conditions, waves develop a more rhythmic character. The period between waves becomes longer. The sounds become bigger, not just hissing, but the deep, resonant boom of a larger wave, the rushing sound of water moving forward in the upper part of a breaking crest. On a rocky shore, waves compress air in sea caves and crevices, producing deep thumps and sighing exhalations as the water pushes in and out. On a sandy beach, breaking waves produce a consistent, regular percussion, one of the most universally recognizable sounds available to the human ear. The sound of the ocean has been shown in numerous studies to have measurable effects on the human nervous system, slowing breathing, reducing heart rate, promoting the kind of calm, diffuse attention associated with rest. At night, when other sounds are absent, the ocean becomes more prominent. The regular arrival of waves, the pauses between them, the small sounds of water moving over and between rocks, the distant foghorn, the cry of a night bird. It is the kind of sound that invites the mind to stop reaching and simply rest. The ocean covers more of this planet than anything else. If you were to stand on the surface of the earth and look in a random direction, you would more likely be looking at water than at land. The average depth of the ocean is greater than the average height of the continents above sea level. The total amount of water in the oceans is enough to cover the entire surface of the earth in a layer about 2.5 kilometers deep, if the surface were flat. A single drop of seawater contains approximately 5 million bacteria, 5 million archaea, 10 million viruses, and 50,000 phytoplankton. Most of the organisms in the ocean cannot be seen. The pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is approximately 1,100 times the air pressure at sea level. At that pressure, the oxygen in our blood will become toxic, and the nitrogen in our tissues will behave differently. Animals that live at that depth have adapted to the pressure not by resisting it, but by being filled with it. Their bodies are essentially pressure neutral, composed of material that compresses to match the surrounding environment. Some deep-sea fish produce trimethylamine oxide, a chemical that stabilizes proteins under pressure. The concentration of this chemical in their tissues increases with depth. The oldest known individual ocean organism was a clam, an ocean quahog, that was estimated to be 507 years old when it was collected. It had been alive since before the invention of the printing press. Whale falls, the carcasses of whales that sink to the ocean floor after death, create discrete ecosystems on the seafloor. The decomposition of a large whale can support a community of organisms for decades, and a single whale fall can sustain an ecosystem for 50 to 100 years. The ocean has seen all of the great extinctions in the history of life, and life has persisted through each one. The ocean itself has never been without life since life first appeared in it. Below 4,000 meters, the ocean floor opens into what is known as the abyssal zone. Abyssal means deep, from the Greek abyss, meaning bottomless. Though the ocean does have a bottom, it is simply very far down and very cold and under enormous pressure and complete darkness. The abyssal plains are among the largest habitats on Earth by area. They cover approximately 40% of the ocean floor, extending in some basins for thousands of kilometers. They are not entirely flat. There are gradual undulations, small volcanic mounds, the occasional trench or ridge, but compared to any continental landscape, they are extraordinarily uniform. The sediment on the abyssal plain is extraordinarily fine. It accumulates at rates measured in millimeters per 1,000 years. Life on the abyssal plain is sparse but present. Sea cucumbers move slowly across the sediment surface, processing it in search of organic particles, leaving trails that can persist for long periods. Polychaete worms burrow through the sediment, creating small disturbances in the otherwise smooth surface. Holothurians, a class of echinoderms, drift just above the seafloor, floating on currents that move too slowly to feel. Rare visitors arrive from above. A fish sinking from the mesopelagic zone, a fragment of whale carcass drifting down from the surface 5 kilometers above the slow, continuous drizzle of marine snow, carrying the carbon fixed by sunlight at the surface down into the dark interior. In the abyss, time moves slowly. Temperature does not change. Seasons do not exist. There is no day or night. The drivers of activity that structure life at the surface, light, temperature, seasons, are absent, and yet the organisms that live there live. They grow, feed, reproduce, and die in the darkness and cold. At the bottom of the world's largest habitat, the ocean has shaped human history in ways that are difficult to overstate. For most of human existence, the ocean was not a barrier, but a highway. Coastal peoples have navigated by sea for tens of thousands of years. The earliest evidence of open ocean voyaging in the archaeological record comes from Southeast Asia and Pacific, where populations expand across enormous distances of open water, reaching islands that could not be seen from any prior landing point. Guided by stars, by swells, by the behavior of birds, and by accumulated navigational knowledge passed from generation to generation. The Polynesian expansion, the peopling of the Pacific Islands from a homeland near Taiwan or mainland Asia, reaching Hawaii, New Zealand, Rapa Nui, and hundreds of other islands across a vast ocean, is one of the most remarkable feats of human navigation and migration in history. It involved vessels capable of long ocean passages, deep knowledge of ocean conditions, and a willingness to sail into open water with no visible destination. The trading networks of the ancient world moved along coastlines and across seas. The Mediterranean was a center of a connected world. Egyptian grain, Phoenician purple dye, Greek pottery, Roman silver, moving by ship in all directions. The Indian Ocean supported trade routes connecting East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia long before European explorers began their own voyages. The age of European exploration, beginning in the 15th century, brought the techniques of deep water navigation to a new global context, connecting ocean basins that had previously been navigated separately and linking the civilizations of Europe, Africa, the Americas, and Asia in ways that transformed all of them. The ocean remains a primary highway of global commerce today. More than 80% of the goods traded internationally are transported by sea. Container ships carrying electronics, clothing, food, and fuel crisscross every ocean continuously. The ocean has fed people, carried people, separated people, and connected people throughout all of human history. It has been a source of food, a route for trade, a boundary, and a bridge. Carbon moves continuously between the ocean, the atmosphere, living organisms, and the rocks of the Earth's crust in a cycle that has been operating for billions of years. The ocean is a central participant in this cycle. At the surface, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves into seawater. This is a simple physical process. Gas exchanges between air and water wherever they are in contact, and the rate depends on the concentration gradient between them. When there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than in the surface ocean, it dissolves into the water. Once in the water, dissolved carbon dioxide enters the ocean's carbonate chemistry system. It can be taken up by phytoplankton during photosynthesis, converted from an inorganic form into organic matter. Carbon that is now part of a living organism. When that phytoplankton is eaten by a zooplankton, and that zooplankton is eaten by a fish, and that fish eventually dies and sinks, the carbon moves through the food web and eventually ends up in the deep ocean, removed from contact with the atmosphere for hundreds or thousands of years. This process, the biological pump, continuously transfers carbon from the surface into the deep. Carbonate-secreting organisms, corals, foraminifera, pteropods, mollusks, remove carbon from the water in a different form, locking it into solid calcium carbonate shells and skeletons. When these organisms die and their shells sink, they eventually become part of the seafloor sediment, and over geological time, that sediment can be compressed into limestone, a long-term form of carbon storage. The ocean has been doing this for hundreds of millions of years, maintaining the carbon cycle in a rough balance that has kept Earth habitable through enormous changes in atmospheric composition, solar output, and biological activity. Sharks are among the oldest vertebrates on Earth. Their lineage extends back more than 450 million years, long before the dinosaurs, before forests, before the first amphibians crawled onto land. The sharks alive today are not living fossils in the strict sense. They have changed over those hundreds of millions of years, but their basic body plan, their fundamental approach to life in the ocean, was established so long ago that it predates almost every other vertebrate group we know of. There are more than 500 species of shark alive today. They range in size from the dwarf lantern shark, which fits comfortably in a human hand, to the whale shark, which can reach 12 or more meters in length and is the largest fish in the ocean. Between those extremes, sharks occupy almost every ecological role imaginable in marine systems. Slow-moving filter feeders, fast open ocean predators, bottom-dwelling ambush hunters, deep-sea scavengers. Sharks have several anatomical features that distinguish them from most other fish. Their skeletons are made of cartilage rather than bone, lighter and more flexible than bone, a characteristic shared with rays and skates, which are their closest relatives. Their skin is covered not with scales in the conventional sense, but with structures called dermal denticles, tiny tooth-like projections of the same basic composition as teeth, oriented to reduce drag and turbulence as the shark moves through water. Sharks have multiple rows of teeth, with new teeth continuously growing to replace those that are lost. A single shark may produce tens of thousands of teeth in its lifetime. The teeth of different species vary enormously in shape, reflecting dietary specialization. The broad, serrated teeth of white sharks are suited for cutting through large prey, while the flattened, pavement-like teeth of horned sharks are designed for crushing the hard shells of sea urchins and mollusks. The sensory systems of sharks are extraordinarily refined. In addition to vision, smell, and hearing, sharks possess a sense called electroreception, the ability to detect the faint electrical fields produced by the muscle contractions of other animals. The organs responsible for this, called the ampullae of Lorenzini, are small, jelly-filled pores concentrated around the snout. They can detect electrical fields of just a few billionths of a volt per centimeter, allowing a shark to locate a buried fish or sense potential prey animal in complete darkness. Some shark species also appear to use Earth's magnetic field for navigation, a capacity that would explain the remarkable precision of their long-distance movements, though the exact mechanisms remain a subject of study. Sharks are not uniform in their reproductive strategies. Some species lay eggs, encased in tough, leathery cases that are sometimes washed ashore and known by the informal name mermaids' purses. Others give birth to live young, either directly or after a period of internal development. The gestation period in some species, such as the spiny dogfish, can be nearly 2 years, among the longest of any vertebrate. Most sharks are solitary, but some species gather in loose aggregations for feeding or at specific times of year. Scalloped hammerhead sharks gather in schools during the day at certain seamounts and underwater ridges, dispersing at night to hunt independently. The function of this daytime aggregation is not fully understood. Sharks have been part of the ocean ecosystem for so long that the fish and invertebrates around them have co-evolved with their presence. Their role as predators, selecting the weak, the sick, and the incautious from prey populations, has shaped the behavior and ecology of ocean life in ways that extend far beyond their immediate prey. The ocean's balance in many places has had sharks as a constant background feature for hundreds of millions of years. Seabirds occupy a position between two worlds, the ocean and the sky, belonging fully to neither and entirely dependent on both. They are birds in the full sense, warm-blooded, feathered, capable of flight, laying eggs and raising their young on land. But for much of their lives, often most of their lives, they are creatures of the open ocean, ranging across enormous distances of water, feeding at the surface or below it, sleeping on the waves. The albatrosses are among the most remarkable of the seabirds. The wandering albatross has the longest wingspan of any living bird, up to 3.5 meters, roughly the width of a small car. With those wings, and with a flying technique that exploits the consistent winds over the Southern Ocean, an albatross can travel enormous distances with minimal muscular effort. It glides low over the water, picks up speed from the wind near the surface, rises against the wind to gain altitude, turns, and glides down again, a continuous cycle called dynamic soaring that requires almost no active flapping. Wandering albatrosses are long-lived birds. Some individuals have been tracked for more than 60 years. They mate for life and return to the same island, often the same nesting site, year after year. They raise only one chick at a time, and the breeding cycle is long enough that successful pairs can only breed every other year. In the non-breeding period, an albatross may spend an entire year at sea without touching land, circumnavigating the Southern Ocean in a continuous, wind-assisted journey covering tens of thousands of kilometers. Penguins represent the opposite end of the seabird spectrum, birds that have entirely abandoned flight in favor of swimming. Their wings have been modified over evolutionary time into flippers, and they are extraordinary swimmers, propelling themselves through water with a motion that resembles the wing stroke of flying birds above water. Some species can dive to depths of several hundred meters and remain submerged for more than 20 minutes. Gannets and boobies are famous for their plunge diving, folding their wings and entering the water at high speed from height, sometimes from more than 30 meters above the surface. The skull and neck of gannets are specially reinforced to absorb the impact of striking the water at speeds that can exceed 80 kilometers per hour. Frigate birds, found in tropical oceans, are remarkable flyers, with the largest wingspan to body weight ratio of any bird, but are essentially incapable of landing on water, as their feathers are not waterproof. They feed by snatching fish from the surface during brief contact, or by harassing other seabirds in flight until they drop their food. Seabird, in aggregate, connect the ocean's productivity to the land and sky. They eat fish and squid and krill from the ocean, and they nest on land, depositing nutrients from the sea in the form of guano on islands and coastlines that would otherwise have very little input of oceanic-derived material. In some places, seabird colonies have been doing this for so long that the soil of their nesting islands is measurably different from surrounding areas, richer in marine-derived nitrogen and phosphorus, supporting distinctive plant communities. Jellyfish are among the oldest animals on Earth. Their ancestors appear in the fossil record more than 500 million years ago, from a time before complex animal life had developed hard skeletons or elaborate organ systems. They are simple animals in the structural sense. No brain, no bones, no blood in the conventional sense, no centralized nervous system. And yet they have persisted in essentially the same basic form through every mass extinction, every major shift in ocean conditions, every transformation of the living world around them. A jellyfish body is largely water, typically 95% or more. The bell, the umbrella-shaped main body, is made of a substance called mesoglea, a gelatinous material that provides structural support while remaining almost as transparent as the water around it. Below the bell hang tentacles, ranging from a few short projections in small species to trailing threads that can extend for tens of meters in the largest. Jellyfish are predators. Their tentacles are lined with specialized cells called cnidocytes, which contain coiled, spring-loaded structures called nematocysts. When a tentacle brushes against a prey organism, nematocysts fire, injecting venom, and sometimes physically entangling the prey. The tentacles then draw the prey toward the central mouth opening, where digestion occurs. The size range among jellyfish is extraordinary. The smallest known jellyfish are barely a millimeter across. The lion's mane jellyfish, found in cold northern seas, can have a bell more than 2 meters in diameter, with tentacles extending more than 30 meters below. It would be among the longest animals in the ocean. Jellyfish move through a form of jet propulsion, contracting the bell to force water downward and propel themselves upward, then relaxing to let the bell refill. They are not powerful swimmers. They cannot maintain a course against a strong current, but they are not entirely passive either. They can navigate vertically with considerable precision, adjusting their depth to find the conditions and concentrations of prey they prefer. Jellyfish blooms, sudden, dense aggregations of jellyfish that appear seasonally or in response to particular conditions, are a feature of ocean life in many parts of the world. A bloom can involve billions of individuals in an area of a few hundred square kilometers. These blooms can be so dense that they clog the water intake systems of coastal power plants and desalination facilities. Despite their apparent simplicity, jellyfish are not ecologically trivial. They compete with fish for zooplankton, consume fish eggs and larvae, and are themselves eaten by a range of predators: sea turtles, sunfish, certain seabirds. They are a thread in the fabric of ocean life that has been present since before that fabric was fully woven. One of the more curious features of the ocean is a phenomenon known as the deep scattering layer. In the 1940s, during early experiments with sonar, the technology of detecting objects by sending sound pulses through water and listening for reflections, oceanographers noticed something puzzling. Their sonar readings consistently showed a dense layer of material at a certain depth, typically between 200 and 700 meters, that appeared to rise toward the surface at dusk and descend again before dawn. At first, there was speculation about what this layer might be. The reflective quality of the readings suggested something with gas-filled structures, swim bladders, perhaps. What it turned out to be was a vast, dense community of animals performing vertical migration. The deep scattering layer is not a single species or a single object. It is a population phenomenon, the aggregate acoustic signature of enormous numbers of small fish, squid, and crustaceans that spend the daylight hours at depth and rise toward the surface at night to feed. The swim bladders of the fish, the gas-filled organs of the squid, the hard shells of the crustaceans, all reflect sound in ways that sonar can detect, and the concentration of all these animals together creates a layer of reflected sound dense enough to resemble a false bottom on early sonar screens. The scale of this nightly migration is difficult to fully appreciate. Over the entire global ocean, trillions of individual animals participate in it every night. They rise perhaps 300 to 500 meters toward the surface, feed for several hours in productive upper waters, and then descend again before the sun rises. The total biomass involved, the collective weight of all these animals, is among the largest concentrations of animal life anywhere on Earth. The migration has consequences beyond the animals themselves. By consuming food near the surface at night and digesting at depth during the day, these animals effectively act as a biological pump, transporting carbon from the surface into the deep ocean in the form of their own bodies and their fecal material. This process, sometimes called the active biological carbon pump, adds a significant additional contribution to the passive sinking of marine snow. The deep scattering layer is, in a sense, a daily heartbeat of the ocean, a mass upwelling and descent of life, operating on the rhythm of the sun, invisible from the surface, but present on every night of every year in every ocean on the planet. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth, so large that it takes a plane more than 10 hours to cross it, there are islands. Some are volcanic peaks, the summits of mountains that rise from the seafloor. Some are coral atolls, the remains of reef systems built on top of old volcanic foundations that have gradually subsided. Some are ancient, worn down to low, flat shapes by millions of years of erosion. Some are young, geologically speaking, still being built by volcanic activity. What they share is isolation. An island in the middle of the Pacific may be thousands of kilometers from any other land. The species that live on it arrive somehow on ocean currents as seeds or larvae, carried by birds, blown in on unusual winds, or arriving on floating debris. Once there, with no connection to any other land, they evolve in isolation, adapting to local conditions without the gene flow that would normally keep them genetically linked to populations elsewhere. The result is extraordinary levels of endemism, species found nowhere else on Earth. The Hawaiian Islands, for example, despite being among the most isolated archipelagos on the planet, have, or had, before human arrival, hundreds of species of birds, insects, plants, and other organisms found only there. Each island in the chain has its own suite of species, many differing subtly from those on neighboring islands in the same group. The surrounding ocean is as much a part of these ecosystems as the land itself. Coral reefs fringe many of the islands, particularly the younger and lower-lying ones. Seabirds nest on the islands and feed in the surrounding ocean, bringing marine nutrient ashore in the form of guano. Sea turtles nest on the beaches. Marine iguanas, found on the Galapagos Islands, have evolved to graze on the algae of the shallow coastal reefs, warming themselves on volcanic rocks between feeding sessions. The ocean currents that flow past these islands influence their climate, their rainfall, the nutrients in their surrounding waters, and the direction of the larval dispersal that connects their marine communities to those of other places. A Pacific island, from the ocean's perspective, is simply a high point on a seafloor that is otherwise 1,000 or more meters below the surface. The ocean surrounds it, shapes it, erodes it, and eventually, over geological time, will reclaim it deep in the ocean, at a depth that varies by location, but is typically between 600 and 1,000 meters in tropical and mid-latitude waters. There's a zone where sound behaves in an unusual way. This zone is called the SOFAR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel. It exists because of the physics of how sound travels through seawater. Sound speed in water depends on temperature, salinity, and pressure. Temperature decreases with depth in the upper ocean, which slows sound. But pressure increases with depth, which speeds it up. At a certain depth, these two competing effects create a minimum in sound speed, a layer where sound travels more slowly than in the water above or below. When sound energy reaches the slow zone, it bends toward it, refracted inward by the speed gradient. Sound waves that would normally spread outward in all directions instead become trapped in this channel, guided along it for enormous distances with relatively little loss of energy. A low-frequency sound produced in the SOFAR channel can travel across an entire ocean basin. Historically, this property was exploited for navigation. An explosive charge set off underwater at the right depth could be detected by listening stations on multiple continents, and the time differences between detections could be used to locate a position at sea. Blue whales and fin whales produce low-frequency calls that fall within the frequency range that propagates efficiently in the SOFAR channel. There's been scientific debate about whether these whales are deliberately using the channel, whether the properties of this acoustic waveguide play a role in the evolution of whale communication. At the frequencies and intensities involved, a blue whale call transmitted in the SOFAR channel could theoretically be detected by another whale thousands of kilometers away. The ocean has its own acoustic architecture, and life, over millions of years, has had time to discover and adapt to it. Sponges are among the simplest and oldest animals on Earth. They appear in a fossil record more than 600 million years ago, and while they have diversified enormously over that span of time, their basic body plan has remained fundamentally unchanged. A sponge is, at its core, a filtering structure, a body perforated with pores and channels through which water is drawn by the beating of specialized flagellated cells, with particles of food being captured from that flow. There is no brain, no nervous system, no digestive tract in conventional sense. Sponges do not move. They have no muscles, no eyes, no behavioral repertoire to speak of. They exist in a very different relationship with the world than almost any other animal, as living pumps, processing enormous volumes of water and extracting the bacteria, dissolved organic matter, and fine particulate material they need to survive. A single large sponge may filter volumes of water many times its own body volume every day, across a reef or a deep-sea community where sponges are numerous. The total filtration effect is significant, removing bacteria and organic particles from the water in ways that can affect water clarity and nutrient cycling throughout the local ecosystem. Sponges come in extraordinary variety. Some are thin, encrusting films on rock surfaces. Others grow into complex branching or vase-like shapes, some reaching a meter or more in height. The Venus flower basket, a deep-sea sponge found in the Pacific, builds an intricate glassy skeleton of silica fibers woven into a lattice structure, so precise that it has attracted the attention of materials scientists interested in its structural properties. Some of the largest sponges in the ocean are found in deep, cold water. Giant barrel sponges on tropical reefs can live for hundreds of years, growing slowly, their interiors providing shelter for shrimp and small fish. Deep water glass sponge reefs, structures built by living and dead sponges in cold, nutrient-rich waters, can extend for kilometers and represent some of the most ancient biological structures in the ocean. Sponges are easy to overlook. They do not move, they do not make sounds, and their ecological roles are subtle and difficult to see directly. But they are an ancient and integral part of the ocean, and the reefs and seafloors where they are abundant are measurably different from those where they are absent. Near the equator, something happens to the trade winds. The trade winds are consistent surface winds that blow from the northeast in the northern hemisphere and from the southeast in the southern hemisphere, converging toward the equatorial zone from both sides. When they meet, they do not simply cancel out. Instead, the air is forced upward. Warm, moist equatorial air rises rapidly, cooling as it ascends, causing the moisture it carries to condense into clouds. The result is a band of persistent, heavy rainfall and cloudiness that circles the Earth near the equator. This band is called the Intertropical Convergence Zone, sometimes abbreviated as the ITCZ. It is visible in satellite images as a near-continuous swath of deep convective clouds stretching across the planet. The ITCZ is not fixed in position. It migrates north and south with the seasons, following the sun, slightly north of the equator during the northern hemisphere summer, slightly south during the northern hemisphere winter. This migration drives the monsoon seasons of tropical regions. As the zone of heavy rainfall moves over different land masses and ocean areas at different times of year, in the ocean beneath the ITCZ, the effects are significant. The heavy rainfall adds large quantities of fresh water to the surface, reducing salinity in a narrow equatorial band. The relatively calm winds in convergence zone, a region historically dreaded by sailing ships as the doldrums, where vessels could be becalmed for days or weeks, allow the ocean surface to stratify strongly, with warm, less dense water floating atop cooler, denser water below. The convergence of winds also drives patterns of ocean circulation near the equator that influence where cold, nutrient-rich water upwells to the surface, and where the surface remains warm and biologically less productive. The ITCZ and the ocean are in constant interaction, the ocean providing the heat and moisture that drive the atmospheric dynamics, and those atmospheric dynamics in turn shaping the surface of the ocean they move across. Among the many creatures that live in the shallow ocean, few are as visually arresting as nudibranch. Nudibranch are sea slugs, shell-less mollusks that belong to a diverse group of soft-bodied marine invertebrates. They are found in oceans worldwide, from the tropics to the polar seas, from the intertidal zone to considerable depths. They are not large. Most species are between 1 and 5 centimeters long, though some can reach 30 centimeters. What makes them remarkable is their color. Nudibranch are among the most vividly colored animals in the ocean. Brilliant oranges and electric blues and deep purples, and spotted patterns of white and black and yellow. Projections in their bodies, called serrata, in some species, rise in rows or clusters, giving them textures that resemble feathers or coral or flowers. In high-definition photographs, a nudibranch can look almost too vivid to be a living creature. The colors are not purely decorative. Many nudibranch feed on toxic or distasteful prey, sponges, sea anemones, corals, and incorporate the toxic compounds from their food into their own tissues. The bright colors serve as a warning to potential predators that consumption will be unpleasant or harmful. This strategy, called aposematism, is common in the animal kingdom, wherever vivid coloration appears. The warning patterns of poison dart frogs or monarch butterflies follow the same basic logic. Some nudibranch go further. They feed on anemones and hydroids whose cells carry unfired nematocysts, stinging cells, and manage to transport those cells through the digestive system intact, incorporating them into the tips of their serrata. They effectively appropriate the defensive weapons of their prey and redeploy them as their own. Nudibranch are hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female reproductive organs. When two individuals meet, they can exchange sperm simultaneously, each fertilizing the other's eggs. The eggs are laid in spiral or ribbon-like masses attached to the substrate. Elegant structures in their own right, they have short lifespans. Many species live only a few months to a year, but in those months, they move through the reef or the rocky shore in their extraordinary colors, going about the business of feeding and reproducing, indifferent to the attention they attract. Scattered across the floor of the ocean, rising from the abyssal plain or from the slopes of mid-ocean ridges, are underwater mountains called seamounts. A seamount is defined as an isolated submarine elevation rising more than 1,000 meters from the surrounding seafloor, with a circumscribed summit. By that definition, there are estimated to be more than 30,000 of them in the world's oceans, though many have yet to be mapped in any detail. Most seamounts are volcanic in origin. They are the remnant of extinct volcanoes that have subsided over millions of years, or active volcanic structures still building upward. Some are tall enough to reach close to the surface, creating shallow areas where currents and biology concentrate. A few rise above sea level entirely, forming islands. The biological significance of seamounts is considerable. In the open ocean, where nutrients are often scarce and the seafloor is far below any influence of surface productivity, a seamount rising to within a few hundred meters of the surface creates a fundamentally different environment. Currents deflected upward by the flanks of the seamount bring nutrient-rich deep water toward the light, stimulating phytoplankton growth. The elevated structure provides hard substrate for bottom-dwelling organisms in a region where the seafloor is otherwise soft sediment. As a result, seamounts often support concentrations of life far greater than the surrounding open ocean. Corals, including deep-water corals that do not require sunlight, grow on the flanks. Fish aggregate around and above the peak, drawing in predators from the surrounding water. In some regions, seamount are gathering places for large animals. Whale sharks, manta rays, hammerhead sharks. Deep-water seamounts host unique communities of cold-water corals and sponges that have been growing for centuries or millennia, accumulating slowly on the hard volcanic substrate. These communities are extraordinary biological structures, long-lived, slow-growing, found nowhere else in surrounding ocean. The seamounts of the ocean are, in a sense, oases in a desert, concentrations of life rising from the relative biological emptiness of the deep open ocean, sustained by their geometry and their position in the currents. Along certain coastlines of the world, particularly the western edges of continents, a process occurs that makes those shores among the most biologically productive marine environments on Earth. This process is called coastal upwelling. It works as follows. Prevailing winds blow consistently along the coast, roughly parallel to the shoreline. Because of the Coriolis effect, the influence of Earth's rotation on moving fluids, the surface water driven by these winds is deflected away from the coast out to sea. As this surface water moves offshore, it must be replaced by something. The water that rises to fill the gap comes from below, from depths 100 to 300 meters, where the water is cold, dense, and rich in nutrients. This cold, nutrient-laden water rises to the surface in a band along the coast, fertilizing the sunlit zone with nitrates, phosphates, and silicates that have been accumulating in the deep for years or decades. Phytoplankton respond immediately, blooming in concentrations far greater than in the surrounding open ocean. Zooplankton populations follow, feeding on the phytoplankton. Fish, seabirds, marine mammals, all are drawn to productivity of the upwelling zone. The major upwelling systems of the world include the California Current off the western coast of North America, the Humboldt Current off the western coast of South America, the Benguela Current off southern Africa, and the Canary Current off northwestern Africa. Each of these is among the most productive marine environments on the planet, supporting enormous populations of fish, sardines, anchovies, mackerel, which in turn support large seabird and marine mammal populations. The water in an upwelling zone has a distinctive character. It is cold, often noticeably colder than surrounding ocean water at the same latitude. It is often green or greenish-brown with phytoplankton. It may be slightly hazy with biological material. In the right conditions, the surface can be covered with a slight, oily sheen from the decomposition of organic matter. Upwelling zones are not uniform. They pulse and shift with the winds, expanding and contracting seasonally. In some years, when the winds weaken or the current system is disrupted by events like El Nino, the upwelling diminishes, the nutrients are not replenished, and the productivity of the entire system can collapse, with cascading effects through the food web. The productivity of these coastal zones is one of the ocean's gifts to the organisms, including humans, who depend on it, for all that has been learned about the ocean over the centuries, and for all the technology that now allows scientists to reach deeper and see farther into it than ever before. The ocean remains largely unexplored. Estimates vary, but it is generally accepted that less than 20% of the seafloor has been mapped in detail, meaning that most of the ocean floor has never been imaged at high resolution, and vast areas have never been directly observed by any human or any instrument. The number of species that remain unknown is genuinely uncertain. New species are described from ocean environments every year, sometimes hundreds of species in a single collecting expedition to a poorly sampled area. Each deep-sea research cruise to a new region typically returns with organisms that cannot be matched to any known species. The deep sea, in particular, is estimated to contain enormous numbers of species that have never been named or described. This is not a failure of science. It is a reflection of the ocean's scale. The deep sea alone, the benthic zone below 200 meters, covers more than 65% of Earth's surface. To systematically survey an area that large, at the resolution needed to document its biology, is an undertaking that would take decades, even with many research vessels operating simultaneously. There are likely species of fish, invertebrates, and microorganisms in the deep ocean that are biologically significant, that produce compounds of potential interest, or that play ecological roles not yet understood, that have never been observed. The hydrothermal vent communities discovered in the late 20th century were entirely unknown before their discovery. Cold seep communities, similar in some ways to vent communities, but powered by methane and hydrogen sulfide seeping slowly from the sediment, were not discovered until 1984. Deep-sea coral reefs of considerable extent and ecological complexity were not widely known until the 1990s and 2000s. These are not minor curiosities. They are major ecosystem types, covering significant areas of the seafloor, entirely unknown to science until recently. There's a great deal left to find, and the ocean keeps its own time, indifferent to whether it is found or not. We have been moving through the ocean for some time now, through the sunlit surface and down into the twilight zone, across the abyssal plain, and up through the water column to the kelp-covered coasts, along the edges of mangrove forests and out into the open Pacific, beneath the sea ice of Antarctica, and back up to the surface of a warm tropical lagoon. It is a large place, too large, really, to hold all at once, but that is part of the nature of it. The ocean is a place that can only be known in pieces, one depth and one coastline, and one creature at a time. What connects all the pieces is the water itself, the same water, moving continuously through all of it, from surface to deep and back, from tropics to poles and back, from ocean atmosphere as rain and back to the ocean as rivers. The water in a wave breaking on a beach tonight might have been part of a polar ice sheet centuries ago. It might have been breathed out by a whale in the middle of the Pacific last year. It might, in some infinitesimally small proportion, contain molecules that were part of the first living organism on Earth. Water is patient too. It cycles without urgency, without destination. It moves through the systems that move it and arrives wherever those systems take it, and then moves again. There is something deeply settling about this. If you let yourself sit with it, the ocean is not finished. It is not at rest in the sense of being static or complete. It is always moving, always changing in the small ways that keep it the same in the large ways. The currents are running. The plankton are drifting. The deep water is cooling and sinking, and the surface water is warming and rising. And somewhere in all of that continuous, interconnected motion, this night is happening. This particular darkness and this particular quiet. You are somewhere in the world, and the ocean is somewhere in the world, and both of you are continuing. The ocean is patient. That is perhaps the most consistent quality of this vast body of water. It has been here for 4 billion years, absorbing the light of a younger sun, cycling through ice ages and warm periods, receiving the rivers of every continent, and hosting the entire history of life. It does not hurry. The thermohaline circulation that moves water from the surface of the North Atlantic to the depths of the Indian Ocean takes roughly 1,000 years to complete one circuit. The sediment on the abyssal plain accumulates a millimeter per millennium. The coral reef, growing at a centimeter per year. Takes 10,000 years to build something large enough to see from space. The ocean operates on timescales that are not human. And perhaps that is part of what makes it restful to think about. The waves that arrive on a shore tonight are made of water that has moved across ocean basins, evaporated, fallen as rain, flowed through rivers, and returned to the sea, a cycle that has been repeating since long before the shore itself existed. There is something in the uninterrupted continuity of the ocean that places individual moments in a larger frame. The fish move through the water. The plankton drift in their millions. The currents flow along their ancient paths, carrying heat from the tropics toward the poles. Deep cold water rising slowly to the surface where it will warm and evaporate and fall as rain somewhere thousands of kilometers away. All of this is happening right now, quietly, while the night continues. You do not need to think about it. It is happening anyway. At dawn, the ocean changes. The first light arrives at the water's surface not as warmth, but as color, a faint brightening at the horizon that slowly works its way across the sky, turning the water from black to deep blue, then to a lighter blue, then to the shifting grays and pinks of early morning. In the upper water column, the nightly upward migration of zooplankton and small fish is ending as the light increases. These animals begin their slow descent, retreating from the surface that will soon be too bright and too exposed. Seabirds begin to move. Shearwaters have rested on the water through the night rise and begin their long, low, wind-using glides. Gannets take to the air, climbing the height to scout the surface below. Pelicans gather in lazy circles above areas where fish are concentrated near the surface. The phytoplankton in the surface layer respond to light immediately. Photosynthesis begins at first light and increases through the morning as solar intensity increases. The tiny chemical reactions happening in each individual phytoplankton cell, carbon dioxide and water converted into glucose and oxygen, are happening simultaneously in enormous numbers of cells across the sunlit surface of the global ocean. In coastal areas, the early morning tide may be going out, exposing the intertidal zone. Shore crabs emerge from beneath rocks. Herons stand still at the water's edge, waiting with long patience for a fish to come close enough. Sandpipers move in small groups along the waterline, feeding in the wet sand at the edge of the retreating sea. The ocean in the morning is quieter than the ocean at midday. The wind is often calm at dawn. The surface is smoother. The light is gentler. It is a good time to be at the edge of the water, or to imagine yourself there, watching the light increase across a surface that goes on, farther than any eye can follow, to the horizon and well beyond. There is a quality of the open ocean that is unlike anything on land. On land, there is always something to orient to: a tree, a hill, a building, the horizon of a landscape. The eye finds texture and reference everywhere. On the open ocean, there is none of that. There is the water and the sky and the line where they meet. That is all. And that simplicity has a particular effect on the mind. There is nothing to navigate by, nothing urgent to attend to. The horizon is perfectly round in all directions. The water moves, but it goes nowhere. The sky changes, but it changes slowly. People who spend long periods at sea sometimes describe a distinctive quality of attention that develops, a kind of broad, diffuse awareness that is neither focused nor distracted, but simply present. The ocean, in its vastness and its continuity, does not invite analytical thought. It invites something more like witness. Below the surface of that flat, horizon-bounded expanse, a world of extraordinary complexity and variety continues in its own time. The currents move, the plankton drift, the fish navigate the gradients of temperature and chemistry that map productive from the barren. The great whales complete their migrations. The squid rise at night and descend at dawn. 11 kilometers below, in the complete darkness and cold of the deepest trench, small creatures move through the sediment, following their own patterns. All of it, every depth, every layer, every creature, is part of a single connected system that has been in motion without interruption for 4 billion years. The ocean is here. It is continuing. And you are somewhere in the same world, tonight, resting. The waves will arrive on the shore tonight, whether anyone is watching or not. That is one of the quieter truths about the natural world. The systems and processes that make up the ocean, the currents, the tides, the slow cycling of water through the atmosphere and back again, do not require any attention or awareness. They continue on their own. The deep water that is slowly upwelling off the coast of a cold continent tonight has been sinking for 1,000 years. It began its journey at the surface of North Atlantic long before anyone living was born. It will reach some other surface long after. The coral polyps on a tropical reef are doing what they do in all the dark hours, extending their tentacles slightly into the water, catching what small particles drift past, gradually, over years and decades, adding their tiny increment of calcium carbonate to the reef structure they share with millions of their kind. The zooplankton that rose to feed at the surface as night fell is still there, scattered through the upper water column, grazing on phytoplankton that spent the daylight hours growing, the whales that are currently somewhere in the open ocean, and there are always whales somewhere in the open ocean, are moving, breathing at long intervals, continuing their journeys. All of this is happening right now, quietly, continuously, the way most of life on Earth has always moved through the hours. The ocean does not sleep, but it does have something like a nighttime state, the dimming of surface light, the nightly migration of small creatures, the reduced wind of the early morning hours, the smooth water before the day's breeze arrives. In that nighttime state, even the ocean has something like quiet, and in that quiet, there is room for you to rest too. Let the thoughts settle. Let the images of deep water and slow currents and drifting plankton and quiet seafloor drift to the mind without being held. The ocean continues. You can rest.